We continue to follow reaction to the attack by the U.S. and its allies on Syrian chemical weapons facilities early Saturday. The Pentagon says the U.S., along with the U.K. and France, successfully launched 105 missiles at 3 Syrian chemical weapons facilities. The first, a chemical research facility near Damascus, and 2 other storage facilities near Homs. This was in retaliation for Bashar al-Assad's suspected use of chemical weapons in Douma last week. The Pentagon also says it's confident Russia did not shoot down any coalition missiles. U.S. officials say they are prepared, though, for any retaliation.
I can tell you that we're ready for it. We're postured both in the region and globally. We're on the balls of our feet and we're ready for anything.
I want to bring in Markos Koulounakis now. He's a foreign affairs columnist for McClatchy News and a visiting fellow for the Hoover Institution. Thanks for your time today. Let's focus on Russia's response or non-response to this. They essentially sat back and allowed it to happen, and that includes the fact that they had a warning. What do you make of that?
So I think that Russia, and when we talk about Russia, we're really talking about Vladimir Putin's Russia. What we're talking about is a Russia that is not informed at a domestic level about the attacks. There's a great deal of disinformation going on. So we're looking at how Putin and his team of cronies and his Defense Department are reacting to this. And what we see are 2 things. One is that for Putin, he is domestically strengthened by this because his population does not believe that, in fact, there was a chemical weapons attack. So he's able to build domestic support for his actions or his inactions and make the international community that has attacked, that means the United States, France, and Britain, look like the bad guys, right? The second thing is his position in Syria really doesn't change at this point. Nothing was attacked that would affect or degrade the Russian presence within Syria, where they are very active and they rely on Syria for naval basing and for other activity. They also do a fair amount of sales of their weaponry to Syria. So I don't expect to see anything different from Russia. Their disinformation campaign will continue. Their discrediting campaign of the West, whether it's in the United Nations or wider in the international community, will continue. And Russia comes out of this unscathed.
But Russia did publicly vow that there would be consequences. So don't they risk looking slightly weak on the global stage if they don't respond in some way, shape, or form?
But let's look at Russia's responses to date. When they take actions, whether they're disinformation campaigns or they're actively trying to affect elections in other countries, they always ride on the edge of being either caught or where they can have plausible deniability. They do not want to enter into a position where they can be caught red-handed doing something, because that level of action or activity would threaten some level of direct action that Russia would have to take. And they're very, very careful about this. When there's a chemical attack in the UK, in Salisbury, for instance, they make sure to try and muddy the waters so that they are not being the ones blamed. When they are interfering in American elections, they make sure that there is a way to say that there was some private or non-state actor who was engaged in that. And so if there is retaliation of any direct sort, you can bet that they will hide their tracks quite well.
So then, if Syria's chemical weapons capability has been diminished, but Russia and Iran still back the Assad regime, have these strikes really changed any dynamic on the ground at all?
Well, they help Assad in an odd and perverse way, because Assad, whenever he is feeling as if he is under threat, or if the civil war is turning, if the tide of the civil war is turning against him, which it is not, by the way, right now, but if he is feeling at all embattled, all he has to do is launch a limited chemical weapon attack, and suddenly the conflict becomes internationalized. It's no longer a civil war for him. So he has this perverse reality and ability to use international actors to fight his wars when the going gets tough for him.
Did not think about that. That's a very interesting point. Today, Nikki Haley addressed the United Nations Security Council on what would happen if Assad used chemical weapons again. Let's just quickly take a listen to what the U.S. ambassador to the UN had to say.
With yesterday's military action, our message was crystal clear. The United States of America will not allow the Assad regime to continue to use chemical weapons. Last night, we obliterated the major research facility that it used to assemble weapons of mass murder. I spoke to the president this morning, and he said if the Syrian regime uses this poisonous gas again, the United States is locked and loaded.
It sounds like what you're saying is that's exactly what Bashar al-Assad wants.
Errol, it's, as I say, a very odd reality. But a small country like Syria, which has so many international actors interested, whether it's Turkey, Iran, Russia, and the United States, and of course, let's not forget the domestic forces, right, that are also international, the Kurdish population that's fighting ISIS at this point. So you have this cauldron of an international action, and all Assad has to do, as soon as he's feeling embattled, is use chemical weapons, and he's going to have an international incident. So you're going to have Russia confronting the United States and Iran. So yes, I am saying exactly that for him, that's what the issue is.
I was covering a speech by President Trump in Ohio recently where he ad-libbed to the audience that he wanted the U.S. forces out of Syria soon. He said, let someone else take care of it. But now we've seen these targeted strikes, and sometimes you hear about mission creep. How do those two facts, what do we make of those 2 points, I guess is what I'm saying?
So this is really an interesting point, Errol, because what we're seeing with President Trump is what I think is really true, which is that he wants to actually withdraw from the Middle East. That is something that he's stated both during the campaign and, as you pointed out, very recently about getting out of Syria. On the other hand, you're seeing the reality of the international pressures and the humanitarian demands on the United States to remain in. So we're seeing some very odd movement in terms of what the president desires and how he's behaving. I'll give you one great example. This is the week that Donald Trump became a multilateralist. Not only did he enter into this Syria action with 2 other countries, 2 allies, France and Britain, but this is also the week when he instructed his team to try and re-enter TPP, the Trans-Pacific Partnership that he was so opposed to during the campaign. So we're seeing a very different type of behavior and reality coming from President Trump at a time when the world is, of course, not stopping to observe how he's going to behave domestically. But when it goes on, in the normal course of international behavior, and he's now falling in line and pursuing the same types of policies that he was so critical of before he became president.
Right. We're witnessing this President Trump's pivot, so to speak. Markos Kounalakis, you make some eye-opening points there. Thanks so much for joining us today.
Thank you, Errol.
We will be back.